This footage has been burning a hole in my hard drive for quite a few months now. That's the result of, after this outing, I managed to get quite a significant chest infection and I was ill for a few months, so not really able to string a voiceover together for one. And also, I was just so fatigued from being so poorly. But here we are, it's several months further down the line, and I'm doing fine. I have here today some footage from Martin Mere wetland where I spent a morning observing garden birds rather than the wild birds. Or, sorry, I should say water birds, waterfowl, things like swans, geese, lots of different varieties of ducks at this lovely little pool. It was so beautiful, and I was so lucky that because it was a very cold February morning, I think, I was the very first person there in the hide that day. So I had it completely to myself, and I could take lots of reference images and film without worrying about disturbing other photographers, as I have done on other visits with my noisy camera and lack of experience in filming wildlife. So when I came home, I got out my Clairefontaine hot pressed sketchbook that you've seen in my videos quite a lot, and I laid down a soft pastel and acrylic marker base depicting the pool and some of the surrounding woodland. Once I'd done that, I took some thick white gouache and I added in the basic silhouettes of all the animals and birds that I wanted to put into this scene. While I was there, I had a little bird watching book with me, and any species that I wasn't too sure about, I looked up and made a note of. So when I came home, I had both my reference images and the book as well to give me a reminder of what each animal looked like. Once I'd marked out where I wanted my birds and squirrels to be, I then went in with my coloured pencils. Now, in my mind, before I'd started this project, I kind of imagined that the birds would be a lot larger, but I think I would have needed to use a significantly bigger surface to get them the size that I had imagined whilst I was out there in the wetland. The coloured pencils allowed me to give the markings that are distinctive to each of the species that I captured, and so that hopefully they're just about recognisable. But they are teeny tiny, maybe something like a centimetre or half an inch in size generally. So they really are quite teeny tiny. That brought its challenges, as it was quite difficult to get the faces in and to keep the proportions when the pencils that I love to work with are really quite soft and don't tend to come to a sharp point. So for those of you that are more inclined to use pencils such as Polychromos by Faber-Castell, or perhaps even Prismacolors, you would have had an easier time, as they're quite hard and they can be sharpened to a fine point. But I was using predominantly Derwent Drawing and Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils, as they're the ones that I have in my collection, which had the best colour matches for the birds I'd chosen to illustrate. These pencils are absolutely beautiful. They're soft and buttery, they're easy to blend, and I just love the natural colours that they come in. But that does make it difficult to work with them on a small scale. For example, here, this teeny tiny blue tit that I'm adding to that wonky little bird table, I really did struggle with, and I ended up grabbing some Polychromos pencils so that I could get the yellow and blue in and make him somewhat recognisable. I had the most lovely time coming back to this piece, as it had been, I think, perhaps even as much as 2 months after I'd laid down the background in soft pastel and some gouache paint as well, before I came back and added the detail to the birds, because I'd been so poorly that basically everything just stopped, artistically speaking, for a while. It was such a beautiful day. I had the best time coming back to my reference images, even though they were only taken with my camera on my phone, I mean, rather than a DSLR, which I do have and have brought back with me on subsequent visits to the Mere. I'd been hesitant to bring out my DSLR because I bought that camera years ago when I was food blogging, and I only have one lens for it, which is a macro lens that is designed to shoot very close up, very detailed images. But obviously, if you're sat in a bird watching hide, even though these birds were no more than 20 feet away from me, my camera would still struggle to capture them in any sort of crisp detail using that lens. After this visit, I did manage to buy a really cheap zoom lens, which, whilst I'm certainly not going to win any wildlife photography awards with, is significantly better at allowing me to get closer footage of wild birds than I could possibly do with my camera on my phone. It's on my list of things that I'd love to add to my kit, a better zoom lens, that is. However, I'm aware that you could literally spend thousands of pounds on the lenses that photographers use who are professional wildlife photographers. My skill set is certainly nowhere near that level, and neither is my budget. So it will be some time before I add that, but I'm glad that I have this cheap little zoom lens that I got second hand, that I can practice with and at least get something a bit crisper than my iPhone, which is really, really old also, allows me to do. Whilst I was actually at the hide and watching these birds and animals interact, it was just the most beautiful experience. I had the most wholesome morning sat there watching these animals play. The crazy antics from the squirrel and that great big chunky rat that I've added to my illustration really had me amused. And also seeing quite so many garden birds, like 4 or 5 blue tits in one go, chaffinches, bullfinches, long-tailed tits, birds that I know are like local to my area here in northwest England, but have very rarely seen in my own garden, and certainly not more than 1 or 2 at a time. Typically my garden has lots and lots of sparrows, occasional flocks of starlings, 2 big fat pigeons, and the occasional robin and blue tit. But to see so much variety was just so beautiful, and it had me reminiscing about a book that I used to read, or rather my dad used to read to me when I was a very little girl, called the Riverside Tales, or Riverside Adventures, I think it was. Funnily enough, I think the book was the same sort of dimensions that my sketchbook is, which is 8 by 8 inches. And this was a book about animals living alongside a riverbank, and I can't remember if they had a boat or if there was just a boat in the story, but it was little chapters all about the different adventures that each of the animals got up to beside the water. It was charming and I loved it, and my dad will still tell you to this day that he got sick to death of reading that book to me because I just wanted to hear it over and over again. As well as loving hearing the stories, I remember poring over the pictures for hours and hours as a child, or shall I say what my memory feels like as hours and hours, because we all know how time travels very differently when you're a small kid compared to a 40-year-old, as I now am. I think that book was created in the 1980s, and so the illustration style was of that period, a little bit old-fashioned now perhaps, but it was still wonderful and it really brought the story to life. And for me, I really find illustration to be a way to tell stories. It's so lovely to be able to take reference and sort of suggestions of things from photographs and videos or real life settings, and then stitch them together in a sketchbook however you like to tell whatever story you want. And I've certainly got enough inspiration from this trip and then subsequent ones I've made afterwards that I really do plan on coming back to this piece and perhaps not replicating it exactly, but developing it. I would love to try it on a larger scale in a big panoramic format, and make the birds much more close to life size actually. And I could play with things like changing the weather. I could have this as a wintry scene instead of a early spring one. Perhaps I can have the birds interact with each other more, try out different poses. as I practice illustrating animals just as spot illustrations in my sketchbook, I'm going to develop my skills and be able to pull off different poses with more authenticity than I am at the moment. As I approach the end of this process, I'm using my Neocolor 2 pastels, which are water soluble wax pastels, to add some pops of colour, to blend in some areas of the ground, and to just provide that full stop that I wanted on my final image. I really must get around to looking it up, but somebody once said that no piece of art is truly finished but merely abandoned. And I certainly felt that when it came to this sketchbook piece. It had taken months to get to this point, and here we are, it's now May, and I started this the first week of February. So, whilst I certainly won't say I was sick of it, I was glad to put enough finishing touches that I could call it done. The final result I would regard more as a preliminary piece. I think there's lots of storytelling here to be told still, and character development with all of my animals also. I'd love to play with the scale some more, and little bit more room to play would allow me to give some more expression and character to the birds, and perhaps give me room to see them interact a little bit more with one another. Not every piece of art needs to be the start of a project, but there is something about this that really captures my inspiration and I'd love to play with more in the future. So I see myself coming back to it to develop and change things up a little bit later on. Now, certainly, you don't need to think of every piece of art in that way, and it's important to make art just to play. But when the inspiration strikes and you really feel a connection with the subject, I think it's worth spending a little bit longer and developing it and just seeing where the art can take you. Thanks for listening.